Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant. EGX 2015 is well and truly over, but now it's time to talk about all of the new and exciting information that was revealed about Elite Dangerous. On Friday we got a whole load of details on the updates for Elite Dangerous, Horizons and the 1.5 patch. Most of it all due toward the end of this year, but we got some tantalizingly wonderful information about what we're going to get next year as well. So here's a look ahead for what we know about the future of Elite Dangerous, as well as a few speculative thoughts. As there was a number of things revealed, I'll break this video down into categories, and to start with, we'll talk about planets. Well, we all know by now that with the Horizons update, we're going to be able to land on planets, and this will include a number of planets from rocky to icy to rocky and icy to the non-atmosphere metal content planets, as well as access to lava planets at some point. We'd also been told that Horizons will change the appearance of planets for everyone. That's for people with and without the Horizons update. As you're flying in space, certain planets will now look different. What we weren't told is just how different they would look and why they would look different. We've now got a bit more information about that, and the fact is that planets themselves, not just the surface, are going to look a lot different. In particular, as with the real galaxy, all planets are now not going to be entirely spherical. We're going to get planets of different sizes and different shapes. David Braben used the term potato shaped to describe some of the planets. Now we know some smaller planets or planetoids actually have a somewhat odd shape and they're not spherical, and now we're going to get things like that within the game. We're also told that we were going to be able to land on planets that are very small in size, probably smaller than Pluto even, to planets that are very large, the largest being up to 7 times the size of Earth, which is massive to say the least. Now Sandro Samarco did mention Europa in his chat. He talked about the cracks which form massive canyons and that we'd be able to fly into them. So it looks like we will also be able to land on Europa and probably a lot of the other moons within the Solar System. And yes, it looks like Frontier grant us the ability to land on Europa, despite all the warnings to never land on that particular moon. Now what I find particularly interesting about the fact that planets are going to be such different shapes and sizes is that they are going to cause the planets themselves to appear dramatically different as we get down to the surface. On smaller planets, for example, the horizon is going to be very close to whatever position you're currently occupying. Whilst conversely, when you're down on the larger planets, the horizons is going to be a long way away. This will be especially noticeable when you're up high, for example on a mountain or flying. Just think when you're on Earth, you look towards a distance when you're in a plane, you can see quite a way, and eventually at some point that vista cuts off. Now, if you're flying around a very small planet, you're going to be able to see the curve of that horizon going from your relative left to right. The smaller your planet, the sharper that curve is going to be. On top of that, the horizon will cut off very close to you, meaning you won't be able to see that far before the vista just drops away. On large planets, it's going to be completely different to that. You'll have the opposite effect. The horizon will be almost flat. You'll see very little curve going from left to right, and your view distance should be very, very large. This assumes, of course, that Frontier don't use any draw distance masking techniques to hide any pop-in that we get in the distance, such as the fog in the asteroid belts, which we currently have and is used to hide transitions from distant objects to close objects. And whilst in the asteroid fields that can be aesthetically pleasing, on planets it would be a little bit of a shame to not be able to see the immense distances you can see on large worlds. Of course, we also know that the Land Rover, your vehicle, is also affected by gravity. So on the small planets, well, actually you're going to be able to land on moons even, and some moons are very small, you're going to have virtually zero gravity. On planets that are 7 times the size of Earth, we're going to have significant gravity, and it will be very interesting indeed to see how that affects the movement of your vehicle. Next up is fighters. Now, in my video I did for the speculative thoughts on the 1.5 update, I mentioned a post from Reddit where a user from Reddit suggested that maybe we'll get deployable fighters, and indeed that's turned out to be the case. We are going to get deployable fighters that we can launch from some of the larger ships. Now Frontier didn't let us know just how large those larger ships are. We know that it certainly will be Anacondas, but I suspect it will be ships significantly smaller as well, such as the Federal gunship, which we know has already got a launch bay. At least it's got the same hatch on the bottom of the ship that was shown in the screenshot that Frontier showed us. Now, we also know that fighters can be used anywhere. They can be used just in random areas of space, and they can be used in conflict zones, extraction sites, as well as down on planets. Now, on planets, this is going to really help the larger ships. Gravity obviously affects the massive ships. It's going to be very difficult to fly an Anaconda or a Type 9 around many of these planets, so the ability to launch a fighter is going to really help. Most of the planets are quite large. Even a planet the size of Mars, which is relatively small, would take a lot of time to get around if you're only going to travel in a vehicle. So having the ability to get into a fighter to travel around will be able to make the ability to get around the planet that much faster. We know that gravity has an effect on the main ships, and we know that gravity has an effect on the ground vehicle. So it's obviously quite plausible that gravity will have an effect on the fighters as well. Now, from what we understand, there's only basic vague information at the moment from Frontier on just how it will affect ships, but we know that essentially gravity is going to keep pulling downwards on the ships, and as the ships basically aren't aerodynamic, they need to use their thrusters to keep aloft. What we do know is that thrusters on the ships are very, very powerful, so clearly they can keep ships up in the air even when gravity is affecting them. But as you're turning your ship, as you pitch or yaw, gravity is going to keep pulling down on your ship, threatening to tip it over and pull it down to the ground. So from the little information we've got, I imagine it to be like a highly modified version of the old Moon or Lunar Lander games, if you remember those. So when you deploy a ship, it looks like you can either choose to have your fighter go under AI control or have your main ship go under AI control. What wasn't really specified though is whether your main ship can go under combat AI control or not. In my interview with Michael Brooks and Sandro Samarco, they were asked whether the fighters would go under AI control or could go under AI control, and Sandro said that that definitely is the case. Ships can be put to AI control, but we can probably deduce a little bit of information from a question I asked them, which was whether or not fighters could be deployed in stations. Now, they didn't really have an answer for that, but Sandro did mention the ability to mark fighters as hostile. So from that, I'd assume that we can mark fighters as hostile, neutral or defensive, and that they would then operate accordingly when under AI control. I'm curious as to whether the same rules will apply to our main ship or not, so we don't really have an answer for that. Now, one question I would have liked to ask and I didn't think to at the time is what happens to us if we die when we're inside our fighter. Now, we do know that when we're on planets and we're in our vehicle and the vehicle gets destroyed, that we will automatically spawn back inside our ship again. So I'd like to think that the same will happen when we're in a fighter. However, in either case, when you're in your main ship and you die, obviously you spawn back at the last station again, as we do currently. We also know that despite being small, fighters are powerful enough to hold their own in combat. Next up is something people have been waiting for a very long time, and that is multi-crew, the ability to fly ships with your friends. So this is now coming very soon with a multi-crew update which will be released in 2016 apparently. I assume that the multi-crew will be part of the Horizon season. With multi-crew, the ship's functions will be split between the two players. For example, one will pilot the ship whilst the other will control the systems or the turrets. It's also going to be possible for one player to go out into the deployable fighter whilst the other remains in the main ship and controls that. We don't know yet how one player actually arrives in the other player's ship. For example, do we have to fly to their location, or can we simply teleport to them? Lave Radio, during their interview with Frontier, asked them what would happen with our own ships when we join another player's ship. Would our ship simply follow along or disappear, or what would happen? Frontier responded that they haven't really decided on that yet, so clearly the gameplay mechanics for this particular aspect of the game are still in the very early stages of development. Currently, co-op is only 2 players. David did mention that adding more players makes things get significantly more complicated. I don't know if that's got anything to do with the peer-to-peer networking we currently have or what, or that maybe in the future we will have additional crew members, but either way 2 is a lot better than 1. We don't know yet if it's possible to have an AI controlled crew member, although that would seem kind of redundant as the ship essentially mans its own turrets and things like that anyway, so if the ship's functions can do it under AI control, it seems a little bit pointless to have a AI crew member do that for you. Talking of crew members and pilots, it was also announced that we will get in-game avatars, or the ability to customize the avatars we actually already have. Now, what I really liked about this particular announcement is not merely that it was about the ability to craft our own appearance, but rather what I really liked was about what it hints for future content of the game, and I'll get to more of that in just a moment. For now though, we'll be able to see what our character looks like through the character creation screen and maybe in some ship menus, although it was mentioned that we probably won't be able to see our own characters or other players whilst on board the ship. All pilots, as we know, currently wear flight suits and helmets, and in the multi-crew screenshot that Frontier showed during the panel, both players were wearing helmets. And although that could have simply been for demonstration purposes, Frontier did mention then that faces are not seen at the moment within the game. Existing commanders can be retrofitted with a face, which is really good news for all of us, because, well, we don't want to be faceless players any longer, do we? Now, this brings me onto the speculative thing that I was just going to mention, and that is walking around. Many of us, me included, have been under the assumption that walking around is not going to be part of the Horizon season. But with the addition of avatars, it seems like that perhaps, at least the very basics of walking around, could make an appearance during 2016. Now, why do I ask that? Well, avatars seem kind of pointless without that ability. Yes, we know we're going to get multi-crews, and we know that we can have another pilot sitting within our ship in the co-pilot seat, but if all they're going to do is just sit there and wearing their helmets, the ability to craft our own appearance would seem kind of pointless. Now, I'm certainly not expecting the ability to walk around our entire ship or get out and walk around in stations, but I know from my own experience that all ships have bridges and cockpits entirely crafted right down to very small details. And you'll be able to see all that if you've seen my virtuality videos. In fact, when I was on the Frontier booth at EGX, one of the crew members spoke about the fact when using the HTC Vive headset, you're now able to walk around the entirety of the bridge more or less, due to the fact that the Vive has a much wider field of view for positional tracking than the Oculus Rift does. So we know that that's all in the game, and we know that it's possible to move around the cockpits like that. Adding more fuel to this particular fire is that Frontier have recently posted a job advertisement for character rigging and animation. So, could this be for Elite, or is it perhaps for one of their other games? And if it is for Elite, is it for something a lot further down the line? It would seem unlikely given the point that we're not even in 2016 yet, so we've got well over a year before we even see mention of Season 3, so anyone being hired now is either probably working on a different game for Elite, or could well be working for content on Elite that we're going to see in the next 6 to 12 months. Fingers crossed then. We've known for a while that crafting is going to be part of the Horizons update, but we've also known the good news is that crafting will also be part of the core game. It's not limited to Horizons, so people without Horizons will be able to craft as well. But details on crafting have been sparse up until now, but now we have got a bit more information. We know that through various means players will have to find components in order to craft, although the details for those means was not clearly listed. But we know that it's going to be possible to customize modules, whether that be weapons or shields or anything else, and basically you'll be able to personalize them a bit more. For example, you'll be able to make weapons fire more rapidly, or at the expense of damage, or perhaps be able to make shields recharge faster, or at the expense of capacity, or something like that. It was also mentioned that customizing modules could have aesthetic changes, such as lasers firing in different colors. I remember seeing quite a long time ago from a developer on the Elite forums that crafting is the reason we've had a very limited selection of modules so far within the game. Essentially, Frontier didn't want to put too much variety of modules into stations because they knew at some point players were going to be able to craft our own modules. So putting variations in too early would have kind of made crafting a little bit more on the pointless side of things. So now we can craft things, or we will be able to craft things that there's no other way of getting in the game. There's also going to be a rarity to modules. Some modules are going to be extremely rare and will of course need rare components. Some of these components will of course be very hard to find, and some of them will probably be located on planets, meaning that you will no doubt need horizons in order to access them. There's also a looting system to be added to the game, although we don't know what looting means, or we don't know any more details about it. Nothing was said about that yet at EGX. And now the 1.5 update for Elite Dangerous. It was confirmed yet again that the 1.5 update will be hitting at the same time as Horizons. 1.5 will go live for all players of Elite Dangerous regardless of whether or not you've got Horizons, which means that when Horizons is released, all players of the game will get a whole bunch of new content, even if they don't get the Horizons content, and that is good news. Frontier reiterated that the number of ships in total will be brought up to 31, which exceeds the initial number of ships Frontier told us we were going to have. Initially they told us it was simply going to be 30, but the Cobra Mark IV takes us over that limit, and we do know that more ships are going to come throughout the lifetime of the game. There will be more ships yet in 2016 as part of Horizons. We've been told that previously. One of the new things that they did mention about 1.5 is the Viper Mark IV. So this is going to be a tougher version of the Viper, but it trades maneuverability for additional modules. It will, however, have the same number of hardpoints. And we did get a brief glimpse of what the Viper Mark IV is going to look like. And that covers just about most of the things that were spoken about at EGX, with the exception of course of Bobbleheads, which was really absolutely an awesome announcement. Now I was sitting there at the front row at EGX, so I got a good view of David Braben when this trailer was played. There's a big massive screen sitting behind the Frontier developers. You would have seen that on the EGX presentation, but what you wouldn't have seen is just how David Braben reacted to it. He was really embarrassed as the whole auditorium laughed and laughed at the trailer being played. But I've got to say, David is really sporting to have allowed a trailer like that to be made, and brilliant stuff. A lot of respect for the guy. So to wrap up then, here's a few personal thoughts on the entire lot of announcements that we got at EGX and in Friday's newsletter. Really looking forward to the ability to access other players' ships. The question is though, are we going to have to fly to the other player's location? Now I'd imagine that the answer to that is going to be yes, because it would seem a little bit odd to just simply teleport into their ship even if they're on the opposite side of the galaxy or many hundreds of light years away. But that is one of the problems that we currently have, at least for me personally, with the game. Playing 20 or 30,000 light years out from Earth, for example, and you want to jump out and play with your friend who's playing around Earth or somewhere else, you can't really do that. So the ability to basically teleport into their ship would be a nice touch, but I can see that Frontier might not do that, and I can see why a lot of players would resist it as well. But that said, I don't think it would preclude us the ability to remote control their fighter, or indeed any of their vehicles. Could we get remote control of a fighter, a deployed fighter? I think the answer to that could perhaps be yes, and it certainly should be yes. I don't really see any reason why we can't just get a remote control of that ship no matter how far away we are, and that would make playing with other players that much easier. And would also go some way to explaining why if we explode in the ship we don't die, we just spawn back in our main ship again. Obviously if we're not sitting in that ship to start with, then we're not gonna die, so we'd just be on our ship, the screen would just switch off and we'd be back there. Maybe very similar to virtual reality or something like that. I don't know, just some ideas, just some thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, I have the vague suspicion, probably only about 50% sure at the moment, that we may get some sort of walking around during the Horizon season. Now I'm certain that won't extend down to stations or planets or even the entirety of this ship, but there's the possibility that we will be able to walk around cockpits, and that is pretty exciting indeed. but we'll have to see for that. Now, one of the things I'm really looking forward to the most, obviously, is getting down to planets. In particular, now knowing that planets are going to be as large as 7 times of the size of Earth, and that they're not all going to be purely spherical. That is going to make things quite interesting. But even more interesting is what are those planets going to look like through VR. Got to admit, I'm very excited to go from space, transition from space down into orbit and then down to the planet's surface, all while looking through the Oculus Rift and then deploying into a buggy and flying around driving around on the ground. That is going to be a wonderful experience. Talking of VR, that's going to be a very strange experience with multi-crew, especially if both the pilots are using VR headsets. Just imagine sitting in your pilot seat with a VR headset on, such as the Oculus Rift or the Vive, and then looking over at your friend who's sitting in the co-pilot seat, and he too has got VR on. You're going to literally be able to sit in this virtual representation of the ship looking at each other. Strange experience that I've been really looking forward to. Going to be interesting, no doubt. We still don't know though when we're going to get access to Horizons. I'd imagine we're going to have an extended beta period and possibly even a gamma period as well, much like we have with patch 1.4. So my bet is that we're going to see the first clips, the first access to Horizons sometime in November. At least I really hope so. But if that doesn't happen, then we know it's certainly going to happen in December, because Frontier have confirmed again and again that it will release in 2015. So either way, it's not long now. Anyway, that just about does it. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time. I'm here to take a look at everything we know currently about Elite Dangerous Horizons. As most of you no doubt know, Horizons is an upcoming expansion for the game due to be released in December that will allow people to land on planets.